All right, so hold on, I can't, oh boy, hold on. I can't get this off my screen, I'm sorry. Uh-oh. For some reason, I can't get this, the recording on progress thing. Oops. Oh, let's see, continue. Oh boy. There's my arrow, there we go. All right, so those were the guesses. This is actually, guys, Busan in South Korea. And so that's where I was Busan, South Korea. And so you guys were in the right region. I just shared that picture. That's actually not my family, but it was the best picture that I could find. Obviously, I'm a little bit older, so I just turned 45 in June, and that is kind of what my family's home looked like, which was just one large room. We did not have a bathroom in there. It was just one room. We had like a small kind of area where you would sort of swap things out. So when we would eat, we had a little table that we put out. Inside a room about that size, I had 8 family members, and we all stayed in that one room. We had an outhouse, sort of that a bunch of people sort of in our courtyard shared. And so that was kind of, that's exactly the kind of place that I grew up living in Korea. And my family didn't have a whole lot. And so my grandfather, who was the patriarch of my family, without sort of the promise of much going on because my family was so poor, his oldest daughter had married an American who was in the United States Air Force and had been stationed in Korea for a period of time. And so she married him, he went off to Germany. And then after about 2 years in Germany, she went to California at an Air Force base there. And that's around the time my grandfather insisted that his daughter adopt me and raise me in the United States of America, the land of opportunity, just because, as his eldest grandchild, and especially obviously it's sort of a male dominated society. As the oldest grandson, he had big hopes and dreams for me. And so I ended up in the United States and ended up at this base. It's called Vandenberg Air Force Base. As you can see, it's south of San Francisco, north of Los Angeles. The base was very famous because it was a testing site for missiles and rockets, often into space. And so you could sort of watch them. We'd kind of go to like the local baseball field and sit in the bleachers and watch the rockets be launched. It was kind of fun. That's a picture of me when I was about 6 years old with my dog Leslie. I think you know how fashion is, guys. I'll bet you that sweater would be in style around this winter probably. So but when I first came to the United States, I didn't speak a word of English. I was 6 years old, like I said, and the administrator at the elementary school that I was placed at, she just decided that she was going to put me in first grade, even though I didn't speak a word of English. I probably should have started in kindergarten, but I was put in first grade. I will never forget those first few months of school because, as you can imagine, I didn't speak a word of English. Had no idea what was going on. I mean, keep in mind that when I flew from, Seoul to Los Angeles, that was the first time I would have seen anybody who was not Korean, right? Growing up in Busan, I was only around Korean people. I only heard the Korean language. There was definitely no diversity where I grew up. And so going to the airport was a shock for me. And then, settling in this Air Force base with my new mom and dad, that was a lot to process, especially since my father couldn't speak Korean. And so my mother was the only person that I knew that could speak any form of Korean. And so it was very difficult. Went to school. At that time, there wasn't a whole lot of support, for students who were coming from someplace else. And so I basically just sat in the back of classrooms for months without having any idea what was going on. And then I just kind of learned to follow people from classroom to classroom, the people that were in my classes. And it was rough, it was a rough few months. And one of the things that was really neat, though, is that on the weekends, my dad loved watching sports. And so I would sit there and watch sports with him. As you can see, some of the famous athletes from when I was a kid, Michael Jordan, a pitcher for the Dodgers named Oral Hershiser, two of my favorite athletes growing up. And so my father did enroll me, sign me up for sports as a kid. And so that was something that really, really helped me. Now, I was fascinated by sports, watching it, and then obviously fascinated by playing it. And the Olympics are happening right now. And I think sometimes we can focus too much on, the results of the Olympics, who's winning what. Obviously for us as the United States, there's been a huge fixation on Simone Biles, who's the most accomplished gymnast ever. And she obviously could have won a bunch more medals, and some people are upset that she's not competing. And to me, she's shown other characteristics of what it means to be a sportsman, through this Olympic, by being a great teammate, by, still being positive. And she just competed, and I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but she did end up competing in one more event. And so for me, what sports was, even though I couldn't speak English, I remember playing t-ball. And I had a friend not a friend at the time, but I had a teammate of mine very early in my time on the t-ball team who went up to my dad and said, "Hey, Mr. Jensen, I'm having a pool party at my house. Do you think Sean would like to go?" And my dad, of course, got emotional, and he's like, "Of course." And so I remember going to this boy's house, to his pool. And I still couldn't speak English at that point, but him and his friends on the team were so nice. And, I remember watching the Flintstones with them, and, swimming in the pool and just hanging out. But through sports, I was able to make friends, because I think that's one of the really cool things about sports, is that, it brings you together, around sort of a common goal. Right. And people from all different backgrounds can sort of put all those things aside, because you have a purpose, that's bigger than your own. And so, as you can see, this is me in sixth grade on my basketball team. At this point, we had moved to Massachusetts because my father was transferred from California to Massachusetts. And you can see the diversity of my team, right? All these different people from different backgrounds. And we're a pretty good team actually. And so I had a huge passion for sports, played sports all the time. My family didn't have much money. And so we mostly grew up with just one car, because my father was enlisted, and enlisted folks in the military didn't make a ton of money. You had great benefits, but not a great salary. And so sports was something that was cheap. It was accessible. Living on Air Force bases, there were lots of fields and parks and things for kids to play at. And so I grew up just playing sports with my friends, riding a bike everywhere, right? I didn't have my parents driving me anywhere, because I lived on a base and I could ride my bike everywhere. And so that was really neat. So my dream, and you guys can add to the chat if you want, but have you ever heard this before? A little boy, when you ask them, "What's your dream when you grow up?" What do they often say? I want to be a pro athlete. And so that's something that I wanted to be. And it's funny, because first I wanted to be a pro bowler. Then I wanted to be like a professional tennis player, professional soccer player, professional football player, baseball player, everything. And when I got to high school, I did compete in several varsity sports. I was a regional, like all-star in soccer. But it was very clear to me that I was not going to be a professional athlete, by junior year in high school. I think that realization was pretty evident. And so I was sitting there thinking, well, what else could I possibly do? If I can't be a pro athlete, what else would I want to do? And so this person, this was my high school guidance counselor. His name was Gary Jones. And he was really important, because at that time when I was in high school, and at this point we're in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of DC. And what I realized is that, well, first of all, I was the first person in my family who was trying to go to a four-year college, right? Because my father enlisted in the Air Force coming out of high school. And my mother obviously did not go to college, coming from Korea. And so I was attempting to be the first in my family to go to a four-year college. And Mr. Jones, my guidance counselor at my school, and my high school was not a very good one. It was a public school. These numbers will horrify you, but my high school, my graduating class started with 1,100 kids, and we graduated 347. So we had the lowest mean SAT scores in the state of Virginia. We had the largest ESL population. You know, we had weekly random, you know, drug sniffing dogs would come through our school. You know, the police, the local police would come with drug sniffing dogs, and every single time somebody would get removed. You know, I don't know how many guys I know from my school who went to prison. I don't know how many girls I know who got pregnant and had to drop out. There was a lot of challenges in my high school, but you know, guys, one of the things I'd say is that I'm thankful because there was no Instagram, there was no Twitter, and so I had no idea what the experience of high school students for other kids were like. I just assumed that my high school was like every other high school, right? I had no idea what it looked like to go to some fancy, you know, high school where the circumstances were different. And so in my context, you know, I was very fortunate that Mr. Jones kind of guided me through the scholarship process, the school process. I was in all regular classes my sophomore year at Mount Vernon High School in Alexandria, Virginia. And he noticed that I was really breezing through the classes. He asked me some questions, you know, how often do you take your homework home? You know, do you study a lot for your tests? And I didn't. I did all my homework at school. I didn't study for tests, and I got straight A's. And so he said, you know, there's these classes that I think you'd be really good for. And he told me about the advanced placement program, and I'd never heard of it. Had no interest in it. And I remember telling Mr. Jones, like, why would I want to take harder classes when I get straight A's? My parents leave me alone, you know, and at that point I was on track to go to like the University of Virginia or William and Mary. And I was completely fine with that. And he said, well, you know, you're interested in journalism and none of those schools are great in journalism. So I think you should think about some other schools. And so through Mr. Jones, I sort of expanded my search. And, you know, he helped me to apply for scholarships. You know, he helped me literally with my scholarship applications. I applied to 125 scholarships, and I think I got 12 of them. And I know that doesn't sound like a great percentage, but it was a good amount of money. And so with Mr. Jones's help, I was able to get into Northwestern University. At that time, had the top journalism school in the country. You know, I had never heard of Northwestern until I sort of expanded my search. And, you know, after I graduated from Northwestern, and I've been published in all these places. The reason I came to Minnesota, actually, guys, is to work at the Pioneer Press. I was recruited my second year out of college to cover the Minnesota Vikings for the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and interviewed, you know, 3 times at the New York Times, 9 times at ESPN, you know, 3 times at the NFL Network. And so I've been able to accomplish quite a bit in my journalism career. That's kind of cool. I covered 2 Olympic games, the Olympics in Athens and the Olympics in Beijing, the 2 highlights of my career. I absolutely love the Olympics. And so that was a lot of fun. Actually, it's 15 Super Bowls that I covered. So I have a correction in my presentation here. But that's me at the Beijing Olympics. You know, that's me at the soccer final. And then through my career, I've just had the great fortune to meet some incredible people, you know, so that's Tony Dungy, you know, Roger Goodell is somebody I've known for a long time. That's a football game I got to cover at the University of Michigan. I was the lead writer for the Chicago Sun-Times at the 2012 Ryder Cup in Medina, outside Chicago. You know, me at the Vikings old facility at Winter Park in Eden Prairie, interviewing Greg Jennings. And this is a picture of me with Bud Grant at the final game at the Metrodome. I can't remember what year that was. And then, you know, my job took me to some incredible places. These are pictures of Michael Jordan. You know, I got a chance to watch Michael Jordan play at the celebrity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe. And so I followed him around for 4 hours and filed a column and ate a steak for dinner. And that was all a part of my job. So it was pretty incredible. You know, so everybody told me how, you know, I had it all. I mean, here I am, in my, late 20s at this point, and life looks great, right? I've got this incredible job. I've got a wonderful wife. I had a newborn son, but the truth is, I wasn't happy, I wasn't fulfilled. And so I really had to take some time to really reflect on, what am I missing? Everybody tells me that I have this incredible life, and I don't feel like I have an incredible life. And as I really went through my own sort of emotions and my mindset and all those things, I realized that I had sort of a blind spot, and so the word gratitude was something that I really struggled with. And so when I often talk to kids, guys, I talk to kids about what is gratitude, and very few can ever articulate what gratitude really is. But this is always, to me, the easiest way, to do it, which is, I want you guys to take a look. So pretty simple thing. And you guys could either write it in the chat or just think it in your own mind. But when you see that picture, what do you see? Well, so for me, I definitely saw the glass is half empty. Growing up, I was just a very pessimistic person, right? I was somebody who, when things were going well, I was looking for the next bad thing around the corner. If something didn't go well for me, I would just tell myself that I deserved it, that I didn't, what was I thinking? Why would I think that, I would win that scholarship? Or why would I think, I just had a lot of negative thoughts. That was something that I really, really wrestled with. And even when something good happened, like I said, I was just sort of, it was just a temporary thing until the next bad thing happened. And so when I talk to kids, I always think it's important, that we as adults and educators and teachers, and I know a lot of you are librarians, but you are educators, obviously, we all know that. And so I think it's important that oftentimes we as adults take for granted things that we know so easily, but that sometimes that we don't do a good job of really providing some clarity and perspective. And so I think it's important to start in the same level with kids, right? So what is gratitude? Maybe we think that's something that kids should know, but I really try to break it down for them. So gratitude, how it sounds, that it's a noun, and then the quality of being thankful. Very simple definition, the quality of being thankful. And so, I start with that. And then I just really try to talk to kids about, characteristics of being a grateful person. You look at life through a lens of abundance versus somebody who looks at life through a lens of scarcity. And again, I was a person who looked at the scarcity part. I focused on the things I did not have, the fact that, my parents couldn't afford our nice vacations, couldn't afford for me to get the newest shoes and the nicest clothes. Those are things that I focused on. What life is offering, somebody who's grateful thinks about what life is offering them. Whereas, people who are not, focus on what life is denying them. People who are grateful see life as a gift. People who maybe struggle with that see life as a burden. Okay. And with the Olympics, I love sharing this example, but there was a skeleton athlete. Her name's Noelle Pace. I mean, nobody's ever heard of her when I share, which is kind of something that's cool. And Noelle had, in her first Olympics, right before she was supposed to go to the Olympics, she suffered an injury in a training session. And so she was not able to go. And then in her second Olympics, she was like a 10th of a second. She was in 4th place and finished a 10th of a second outside of the bronze medal. Mm-hmm. And so Noelle Pace had gone through a lot of things. And then her and her husband, she had had a miscarriage, leading up. And then finally she decided, hey, you know what, I'm going to try to go to the 3rd Olympics. And before her 3rd Olympics, she said, I'm going to do something to show my gratitude. And so she said I spent maybe 3 hours yesterday riding on my sled. I wrote everybody's name who helped me to get there. I have like 500 names on there, hundreds of loved ones, 10 years, 4 runs, 1 sled, 1 dream. Now, when Noelle Pikus Pace went to the Sochi Olympics, she was not expected to do anything. You know, she hadn't had great qualifying runs or anything. She just was, you know, she was sort of seen as past her prime. But does that look like the face of a grateful person? And I remember watching her story on like the Today Show, and she was just so giddy, and it was just so sincere and authentic. And so I looked into her story, and I found all this out about Noelle Pikus Pace, and it just was so incredible, you know. And you just can see the joy in her face. You can see how grateful she was, and that act of gratitude that she did. I mean, think about doing that, guys. 3 hours. Can you imagine 3 hours of just writing names and just pouring through your mind on all the people who've helped you to be in a position to pursue a dream? Now, one of the athletes I've had the great fortune to work on in my middle school rules series. So I created a book series with my publisher called the Middle School Rules. You know, as I told you guys, I love sports. And one of the things that I saw as a father is that there are not a lot of great sports books that are quality, you know, that are well written. I think a lot of the sports books for kids are just kind of slapped together. I know because I just recently had this where somebody contacted me about, hey, my friend just got offered an opportunity to write a, you know, book with a big publisher on Suni Lee, you know, who obviously won the all-around gold medal. No offense to this person, never heard of this person, you know, and they're trying to get in touch with Suni, which isn't going to happen, right? I mean, there's marketing agents, there's just so many challenges to getting in touch with the athlete for the book. And so what'll happen is this author that I've never heard of, this sports writer that I've never heard of, is just going to curate, you know, information from Sports Illustrated and the New York Times and reporters who've spent a lot of time doing these pieces, and they're going to put this collection of anecdotes together, and the publisher is going to, you know, take pictures from the Associated Press or Getty, and they're going to put together a glossy book and say, who is Suni Lee or something. And my point is that's the kind of books that I was reading when I was a kid, and they were disappointing. When I was in elementary school, because my family didn't have a lot of money, I went to the public library a lot, and I would check out biographies. I loved biographies because for me, biographies was a way to see the challenges that other people faced, because I faced a lot of challenges myself with identity, you know, being a Korean kid growing up in an American military context, being the only Asian person anywhere, you know, that I just did, there weren't Asian people around for me growing up. And so I was just fascinated to read the hard stories that people went through to achieve their dreams and to chase their dreams. So I saw a lot of value in biographies. But as you guys can imagine, I'm reading a lot of biographies as an elementary school student that were inappropriate for me to read as an elementary school student. I remember in the 4th grade, I don't know, I think I saw it in like the about to be returned to the shelves, you know, sort of bin that there was. And it was the autobiography of Malcolm X. You know, and I went home, rode my bike home 2 miles from the library to home, and I started reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And Alex Haley is an incredible writer, incredible detail in the book, and I was captivated. And I remember I took a break to eat dinner, but after that, I just read the book, and I think I finished reading the book at like 3 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't put it down. But you know, there's a lot of things that I was reading in the autobiography of Malcolm X that I certainly don't think I should have been reading as a 4th grader. And so, you know, fast forward obviously a few decades, and having my own son Elijah, who was also very passionate about sports, when I was looking for sports books for him to read as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, I just didn't find the things that I felt were of the quality that I thought he deserved, which is why I came up with Middle School Rules. You know, and so I wanted to write books with professional athletes. And having covered 16 years of the NFL, you know, I realized that every athlete who made it to the NFL, man, there's some stories right? And before they were famous, before Brian Urlacher was a known name, he was just a little kid, you know, in a small little town, Lovington, Texas, with a big dream. And so here's the story of Skylar Diggins, who was the third athlete I worked with. And Skylar was a little girl growing up in South Bend, Indiana, came from a challenged family. And so, you know, drawing it back to gratitude, this is one of the stories from the book, is her and her mother, Renee, were very close. And this is a picture of them singing songs together in the car. But before every game, from when Skylar was a little girl, even through college, her mom was at every single game. And Skylar would look in the stands and her mom would do sign language, you do you. And the reason she did that is because Skylar was such a talented basketball player. She would often play up in usually 2 years. And so guys, I mean, imagine what that's like when you're in 6th grade and you're playing with 8th graders, or when you're in 7th grade and you're playing with 9th graders, right? And so Skylar would always feel the weight of those pressures, and she would just make sure her mom, Renee, would just remind her, hey, just be yourself, you do you. And so fast forward, and Skylar becomes the #3 pick in the WNBA. She's been very successful. And Nike went to her and said, hey, we want to create a shoe for you. Do you have any ideas? Now, most times athletes have no idea what they want to do with their shoes, but Skylar says, I have an idea. And so with her shoe, and when I do these in-person talks, guys, I usually wear these shoes, but Skylar was able to do a tribute to her mother. So on one flap of the shoe, it says, you do you. And on the other flap, on the other shoe, it says for Shug, which is her mom's nickname, right? So Renee is kind of known as Sugar. And so so that's kind of cool, right? That's a lot of thought. But to me, as I explain to kids, there's different levels of gratitude. Now, the cool thing is, you know what Skylar did? It's not that she just thought of honoring her mother in her first signature shoe. She had the prototype shoe, the very first shoe that Nike made of Skylar's signature shoe. It wasn't sent to Skylar Diggins. Guess who it was sent to? It was sent to her mother. And guess what day it was sent to her mother? On Mother's Day, delivered in person on Mother's Day in 2016. And you know, what do you think Renee was thinking when she opened that door and opened that box and saw this shoe, right? And so Skylar understands what gratitude is. And by the way, Skylar Diggins is playing right now in the Olympics, even though I believe she's just turned 31. Skylar made her first Olympic team. She's competing for a gold medal. I mean, not there. I think they're in the semifinals now, but she's competing at the Olympics. Now, the second thing I try to talk about. So we talked about what is gratitude, right? Second thing that we talked about is why is gratitude important? Now, this is like, to me, really, really important. And this is what I was missing, right? When I was a kid, I just didn't know what gratitude was. And so I had no idea why it was important. So I want to make sure that we have time for us to answer some questions too. But, you know, 2 stages of gratitude, and this is from a psychologist, acknowledging the goodness in one's life and acknowledging the goodness in one's life, and then recognizing that some of the source of that goodness lie outside of ourselves, right? I think that's a really, really challenging thing, is to think outside of ourselves, especially in the United States, right? I'm from Korea. I've been back to Korea. I've been fortunate to travel to many countries all over the world. And I think that's something that we could do better in the United States of America, is think a little bit less about ourselves, right? And so can somebody tell me in the chat, what is this a picture of with the horse? I'm gonna look at the chat and see. Yep, that's right. Loney. Yep, you definitely got that right. Blinders. And you know, I think I show this picture because, and kids, some kids actually get that it's blinders, but I show kids this picture because I think sometimes we can put on blinders, right? And that's the kind of kid I was. I was so good at accomplishing goals, setting goals and accomplishing them. But in the midst of trying to accomplish those things, I just ignored everything, right? I was so focused on whatever that goal was, each task. I was really good at that, but I would just ignore all the things going on around me. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of us. And so, you know, again, scientific benefits of gratitude, helps with our physical health, self-esteem, all these things, right? But I want you to read this. Again, I wanted to use an example that's kind of relevant. Does anybody read this quote for yourself? And please, in the chat, tell me if you can guess who that athlete is who said that. Anybody? Guess who that athlete is. Just throw out some athlete names, guys. What athlete do you think might have said that? That's a good guess, Emily. Michael Jordan, very good guess. No, anybody else? How about this? I'll give you a quick hint. No, not Dennis Rodman, Jennifer. Quick hint. It's an Olympic athlete. How about that? Anybody got some Olympic athletes? Yes, Lori, you got it. That's right. Everybody's right. It's Michael Phelps. And so read that quote again. Now, Michael Phelps is the most decorated Olympian in the history of the Olympics. I believe he's won 24 gold medals by himself. Michael Phelps has won more gold medals than 36 nations in their entire history. That includes Mexico, that includes Argentina. Okay, think about that. One man has won more gold medals than many entire countries. But when Michael Phelps was a little boy, his parents were going through a divorce, and he had ADHD, and he was bouncing off the walls, and his mom put him in swimming. He showed an immediate natural skill. A very successful local coach in Baltimore, Maryland, went to his mom and said, "Hey, your son's got a ton of potential. Can I work with him?" Of course, she said yes. And so from a very early age, Michael Phelps got into swimming, and it was a wonderful thing. But guess what happened? Michael Phelps just focused on the next race, on the next record, on the next meet. And he went through his young life ignoring all the other things that maybe you should be learning and experiencing to just focus on swimming. You know that Michael Phelps once said in an Under Armour commercial that he trains 365 days a year because it gives him like 52 more hours of training than any other athlete could possibly have in the world. I mean, that's the kind of mindset. Well, guess what? When you get to the end of his career, when he's in his, when he's like 33 years old, that's when he said this. That's when he became lost, because Michael Phelps didn't know who he was. Right? All he was this swimmer. And despite all of his success, he didn't know who Michael Phelps was outside of being a swimmer. And if you guys can recall, he had some issues with DUI, he had some issues with drugs, and he talked about being suicidal. And today he's really doing great. He's really embraced his mental health. He had some incredible comments, when Simone Biles was going through some of her challenges. And so Michael Phelps has really kind of turned things around, obviously. So, and then the last part before I open it up for some questions and things, so start thinking about questions you may have for me is, and this is the part that I hope that we all can sort of think about, because very few people get to this point. How do you actually practice it? We know what gratitude is. We know why gratitude is important, but how do you practice gratitude, right? I know that for kids, they think that sounds silly. But for all those things that we talked about, the mental benefits, the physical benefits, it's really important that we practice gratitude. So what can we do? I break this down as simply as possible for kids. One, we can be positive, right? Try to be positive. Two, say thank you. I always ask the kids, I say, "Hey, have your parents ever told you stop saying thank you so much?" And they all laugh, because no parents ever said that to their kids, that you say thank you too much. You can smile, right? And then you can help others. And I'll ask, just like I asked the kids, can everybody who's tuned in, can you do those 4 things? Are you capable of doing those 4 things? Yes, there's really no barrier for any of us to be able to do those 4 things. But do we do them all? It's hard, right? And I have to practice it because it's not natural for me. Remember, I told you guys, growing up, gratitude was a blind spot for me. And so I've had to learn, to practice it more often. Hopefully you guys can hear this audio. Can you hear the audio? Thumbs up.
Sean, I don't hear the audio.
Pointing to his daughter.
We can't hear anything for the video. We can hear the sound.
So, sorry, you know, I show that video so kids can really see what that looks like, because as you could see the emotion for Chris being able to thank the officer who saved his life when he was young. And then you could tell from the officer too, the officer at first had no idea who this person was, right? You know, kind of a stranger approaching him, getting kind of into his personal space. And then once the officer knew who it was, you could just completely see his body language change. And you could see what it meant for both of them, right? The person who was showing gratitude and the person who was receiving gratitude, what that meant, you know? So I feel like that's such a great illustration to see what, you know, what gratitude looks like. And so, you know, as I mentioned to you guys before, you know, I started this book series. I'm currently working on book 7 of the middle school rules series. I try to be very intentional, guys, about diversity. You know, one of the things that inspired me to become an author was there was a study, I believe, from the University of Wisconsin in like 2012, and they broke down every single children's book that had been published the previous year, and I think it was like 3,000 books, and like 98% of them were written like by white authors, and like 96% of the books had sort of the central character was either white or had white characteristics, you know, and that really bothered me, you know, just because I think for me, I grew up in a very multicultural context. And so as you can tell, I try to be very intentional about diversity in my book series. I do have 2 white athletes that I've been very fortunate to work with, and I've got more that I'll be working with in the future. But I try to be very intentional about the diversity. And I've had this conversation with white parents. Like I remember with the Charles Tillman book, you know, they said, hey, I think it's great that you write these books, you know, for Black children. And I said, no, it's not for Black children, right? I write these books for everyone, because I think it's important for white kids and Black kids to see, you know, Charles Tillman be sort of like a hero, just like I think it's important for, it is important for Black kids to see Black Panther, the movie, but it's important for white kids to see Black Panther, you know, to see a Black superhero, you know, just like I'm excited for, you know, Shang-Chi, right? It's the first Asian Marvel, you know, superhero. You know, I think that's important for everybody to see, not just for Asian kids. So I've had the fortune of, you know, talking to students all over the country, as I mentioned, and, you know, working with these athletes. You know, Skylar does camps every summer, you know, free camps for kids for basketball. That's who Skylar Diggins is. Jamal Charles is an ambassador for the Special Olympics, because when he was a little boy, he participated in the Special Olympics. So Jamal Charles is the first known professional athlete who participated in the Special Olympics as a kid. Yeah. That was at a St. Paul library. It's Brian and I doing a special reading of his book with the Chicago Bears. This was with the Chicago Public School System. It was sponsored by Follett, as you could see. That was a lot of fun. Little selfie action at a school. And then that's my wife, Erica. Very fortunate, to have my family, support all my endeavors. That's my kids, Elijah and Zara. This is like 2 years old, the picture. So my son's about to start 8th grade and my daughter's about to start 5th grade here in Minneapolis, where I live. So, one of the things that I did, guys, is in my 30s, I sort of reflected, well, who are the people that I'm most grateful for in my life as I started to learn what gratitude is. And I would love for you guys to sort of share, but there was somebody that I realized that I kind of, my grandfather, obviously, who was the one who insisted on me getting adopted, my aunt, who became my mother, obviously my wife, who's been, I've been with her for since we started dating our freshman year at Northwestern. So we've been together for 26 years now, which is actually 28 years now. So, but does anybody know who I thought of? I thought of somebody else, that was really important. And I think it's a really important reminder that sometimes the most important people in our life are not always the ones that are directly in our life for a long period of time. Anybody have any thoughts? Chats, anybody? No? Well, so the other person I thought of is, let's see if I'm sure somebody got it. Yeah, exactly. My high school counselor, Gary Jones is his name. And, but, I kind of went through, guys, and I thought about Gary Jones and how much time I spent with him. I calculated that I spent about 2 hours with Gary Jones throughout high school, from sophomore year to senior year, probably 2 hours with Gary Jones. But he literally changed my life. Over the course of 2 hours, over 3 years, Gary Jones changed my life. And, after I had that epiphany, obviously, I immediately picked up the phone, looked up Mount Vernon High School, hadn't talked to anybody there in forever because, I went to Northwestern, worked in Milwaukee, worked in St. Paul. I was definitely not back in the DC, Virginia area. So I reached out to Mount Vernon. Hey, I got to talk to Mr. Jones. And so he had obviously not worked at the school for several years. And I told them, please try to track them down. A few days later, they called me and they said, Mr. Jensen, we're sorry to inform you, but Mr. Jones died a couple of years ago. And that was really disappointing to hear, obviously, that here was this person who literally changed my life. I mean, if you look at the 5 most impactful people in my life, Mr. Jones will always be in my top 5 because of Mr. Jones, I went to Northwestern University. Because of Mr. Jones, I met my wife, Erica. Because of Mr. Jones, I would have never known anything about Northwestern University, guys. I was going to the University of Virginia or William and Mary. That was definitely my plan. That was my parents' plan. Mr. Jones is the first person who sort of made me think, well, maybe there's somewhere else outside of Virginia that might be a good fit for me. And so what I do is I have the kids do an exercise where, I have them write a thank you note to somebody who's not related to them, and the thank you note is just simple. And I just have them pick somebody that they want to thank, and that's one of those gratitude things that we can do is write a note of gratitude to somebody that's made an impact on us. And so I've heard some incredible stories of kids being able to sort of experience that. And I would challenge you guys, all of you, even though you guys are adults, I would challenge you, write a note of gratitude to somebody that you appreciate, somebody who made a huge impact on your life that maybe, you haven't articulated that gratitude to them like I did, because I certainly, wish if I could do top 3 things that if I could do it over again, would be able to just share with Mr. Jones the impact that he had on me. And look, I'm sure that I'm not the only student that Mr. Jones impacted in that way. I'm sure there are many, many others. So I do want to take some time to answer some questions. Do people have any questions for me? I love the person who talked about their math grade, their math teacher. That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, I love those stories, guys.
Sean?
Yeah, and sorry for those who couldn't hear. It was fine, that you couldn't hear it. It was just kind of the narration of the story. But honestly, I've had that where you can sort of track what was happening, with that video. So sorry that you couldn't hear it though. If you guys want to either just unmute yourselves, or if you want to just write a question in the chat, I'm happy to answer them.
Sean, I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I wanted to say thank you for writing an excellent book. I love the illustrations, the story. I love that I read the one about Kamal, and I loved how he was a struggling reader and talked about how he,
Yeah.
and it was really, I love it. It's going to be on my bookshelf in my classroom, and I think a lot of kids are going to really enjoy reading that.
Well, I really appreciate that, Ms. Hopkinson. And I think that's the thing that I've learned in covering the NFL for 16 years and going to the Olympics is sometimes we as Americans, we have this tendency to sort of just glorify and just focus on the positives and the results. So when we look at somebody like LeBron James, we focus on his wealth and all his all-stars and NBA titles. And then we forget what he had to go through to get there. You know, we forget that he missed like over 100 days of school when he was like in fourth grade because he and his mom didn't have a steady place to live. You know what I mean? But those kind of things don't leave people. You know what I'm saying? I mean, for all the success LeBron has, he still remembers what it was like to struggle. You know, those are not things that they're embedded in you. I still remember the struggles that we went through, you know, when I was growing up. Those things will not leave me, no matter how big the house I live in or how nice a vacation I go on or whatever deposits are made into my bank account. You know, so I really appreciate that. And Jamal is so inspiring, Ms. Hopkinson. I mean, a kid who participated in the Special Olympics, and I really struggled with that book because it was so sad for so long. I mean, it was like 17 chapters into his story before it started getting better. And then it got better like fireworks, right? I mean, it was just like one amazing thing after another. But none of that really started for Jamal Charles until like his sophomore year of high school. You know, that throughout his childhood up until his sophomore year, it was just one indignity and insult and setback after another. And so his is the story of perseverance. And so, yeah, that's one of my favorite books. It's just, he's just such an inspiring person. And you know what? He's the kind of athlete that sports writers didn't like because he didn't do interviews. And so there's not a whole lot written about Jamal Charles because he didn't like the press. And it wasn't that he disliked the people. It's just that he was very shy and he didn't like speaking in public, you know? So I really appreciate you bringing that up. The books are, no, Scholastic doesn't. And I don't know if you guys know how well you know it, but my publisher chooses not to work with Scholastic. And part of it is, guys, that, man, Scholastic is sort of like Costco and Sam's Club, is it's great for consumers, not so good for publishers, you know, and not so good for authors, to be honest with you, you know, unless you're, you know, J.K. Rowling's or something like that. You're just, you know, they really dictate terms on what you get for book sales. And so for me as an author, I'm fully on board with my publisher's perspective on Scholastic that I would get cents on the dollar, you know, if I sold. And so, yes, I could say that I've sold a ton more copies of books than I have, but, you know, financially, it just isn't something that makes sense for my publisher, nor for me, you know. And so unfortunately, my books are not available through Scholastic, which is always hard because at my kids' school, they always have the Scholastic book fair. And people always ask me that question, but you know, it is what it is. So another great question. I'm trying to see. Yes, I believe you'll have access to the presentation later. You know, I do a lot of due diligence on the athletes I choose to work with. Now, I know that for you guys, maybe it's not the huge athletes that you've heard of per se. You know, I haven't worked with LeBron James. I haven't worked with Simone Biles. Some of that has to come down to relationships. You know, some of those bigger athletes are just so hard to sort of connect with. You know what I mean? They have so many different agents and so many levels of things. And Middle School Rules is not been a New York Times best-selling book. And so it doesn't have sort of that same cachet that maybe, you know, other publishing houses might have. And so my seventh athlete is a very big athlete though. And so, you know, I try to continue to put out good books, and hopefully at some point I'll be fortunate to work with an athlete who really sort of takes, you know, the prominence of the Middle School Rules series to another level. So we'll see. But it's also important on who I work with. I have turned down a few very large athletes because I didn't believe that they were authentic and wanting to work with kids because, I have to have athletes who have a heart to inspire kids. If you remember Charles Barkley saying, I'm not a role model. I don't want to work with an athlete who doesn't believe that they're not a role model. I want to work with athletes who understand that their actions, their words, everything they do is reflected in children, that children see that, and that there's something, that they are influenced by those athletes. And so I have to have athletes who understand that their influence over children is immense, and they take that with sort of a stewardship mentality. Elise, the book that Ms. Hopkinton was talking about was The Middle School Rules of Jamal Charles. So he was the student who struggled with reading. He was in special education classes. He participated in Special Olympics. Do you have time to talk about the process of writing books? Yes. So I'm very fortunate, guys, that for 16 years, I was a sports writer. And so I have that's my superpower, right? I mean, being able to write stories on deadline as quickly as I do, it's very, very difficult to do, right? So you think about the Super Bowl, right? When does the Super Bowl start? You guys know it starts late at night, right? And so I have to watch the game. I have to write a story and file it as soon as the game's over. I have to go down to the locker room with thousands of other reporters, interview the athletes, transcribe the reports, go back upstairs. And then I usually have like 30 to 45 minutes to file 2,000 words, usually 2 to 3 different stories. I mean, that's not normal. And so I'm a very quick writer because of 16 years of having to do that, to write tens of thousands of articles. And so my ability to write these books, I have a full-time consulting business. So I write these books on the side. I do the speaking on the side. All this is just extra because this is what I'm passionate about. But each of these books, usually from start to finish, take me about 3 months, but it's not full time, right? I mean, I have to do this basically, in my spare time. And so my writing process is very, very fast. Yes, I meet with each of the athletes in person. So I spend usually between 6 to 10 hours with them, usually in their hometown, so that I can see all the places they grew up playing at, meet some of their coaches, meet some of their friends, see their childhood homes, things like that. And so I do meet with them in person. Charles Tillman is a dear friend of mine. And so that book is very special to me. If you really, really press me completely off the record, if you said, what's your favorite book, would be with Charles Tillman, because Charles is a very good friend of mine. And it was a lot of fun to be able to go to Copper's Cove, Texas, and spend a lot of time with Charles and his family and his friends and get to know him. So
I just finished that book about Charles Tillman, and I
yeah,
appreciated it. And I just wanted to say that as far as biographies go, your book was very appealing and very accessible to children.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate that.
I think it's true what you said, about biographies and sports biographies.
Mhm.
And quite often students will be required to read a biography, whether it's for a library program or in the classroom. And it's kind of sometimes the last thing they want to read fiction. And so I wish I had known about these, and now I do, so I can promote them to kids.
Well, I appreciate that. And, one of the things I'm proud of, guys, is that I'm a reporter at heart. And so all my books have things that have never been reported before. And I also, the reason it'd be more profitable for myself to actually not work directly with the athletes, because obviously I have to give the money, give some money, share some of my royalties with the athletes. But the reason I do that is because I want these books to be true reflections of the defining moments of each of these athletes' young lives. And how could I do that without talking directly to the person? And to me, that's so important. And so what I love is that every single person that I've written a book on, their family members will say, I never knew this about this person. So for instance, with Charles Tillman, his wife didn't know about the chapter, since you're familiar with the book, where his cousin was bullied and Charles stepped in. His wife didn't know that. And Charles had actually forgotten it. It was just because I talked to the cousin and I just asked her, it's the last thing I asked her. I said, hey, what's what's the most special story from your experience with Charles? And she told me about being bullied and how Charles intervened and just how much that meant to her. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. Any other questions? I think we got time for, and I want to be respectful. I know that you guys are looking forward to a break before you guys have a full day ahead of you. And so I want to honor your guys' time, but I'm happy to answer a few more questions if people have them. I think I've answered the questions that I see, unless somebody wants to retype a question. If I happen to miss your question, feel free to just retype it so it's kind of refreshed on my screen. I do want to say too, though, that you all, many of you are librarians. I think it's so important, the job that you guys do, you know, and I know that you guys have a passion for books. You guys have a passion for, you know, helping kids, and I've met some incredible librarians, and I just feel like it's, you know, you guys are sort of unsung heroes, right? And I know schools are having diminishing resources, and often you guys are pressed to do a lot more than is probably required. And you keep doing it because you believe in what you're doing, but librarians just play such a critical role for kids. I mean, I think it was Britt, you know, who talked about, man, you know, having students come up and maybe being frustrated and not finding biographies they like, but now hopefully, you know, there'll be some kids who enjoy biographies because they might pick up one of the middle school rules and for whatever reason it jumps out to them. No, I can't say what book 7 is yet. I'm sorry. We'll be announcing that. It'll come out at the beginning of 2022, right at the beginning of the year. But it is, you know, we're not able to make that. We just did the cover though for it, so we'll be doing the publicity. My publisher will be sort of sharing that with, you know, different distributors in the coming months, and so we're really excited. It's with a current, you know, professional athlete, and so I'm excited because this athlete's in the prime of their career as well. So hopefully, you know, it will sort of bring a little bit more attention to the middle school rules series. So
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sean. This has been great. Really.
yeah, well, thank you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. And like I told your leaders, I mean, I prefer to do these things in person. You know, just the emotion of the gratitude talk is just, it's been very humbling, you know, and I don't like this stuff. I don't like Zoom. I mean, it certainly has its place, but I am a in-person person. You know what I'm saying? I don't like text messaging. I don't like email. If I have to, I'll talk to somebody on the phone. But I hope that someday I'll be able to come visit with you guys and maybe we could do a different presentation that I have. But, you know, I really appreciate the work that you guys do, and, you know, wish you all the best for the rest of today. And anybody who wants to, feel free. I don't care what it's for, but feel free to email me if there's any questions or you have any comments or anything. You can reach me at my on my website. There's an easy way to just send me either a voicemail or to send me an email. But I would love for, you know, you guys to reach out. And again, I have so much respect for librarians, and so just know that I really value what you guys do, and just you know, encourage you guys to keep doing the good work you're doing.
Thank you so much. And to remind everyone, if you want to discuss books that were on the preschool reading list that will start in 15 minutes, the link that you originally were sent is the right one. And Sean, this was really great. Thank you so much. And hopefully
It was my honor.
Hopefully we will see you in person someday. So goodbye, everyone.
Well, thank you guys.
Have a good day. Hope to see you at the next talk. Bye.